The first snow had barely melted when Clara swung her axe into the log, sweat glistening under the spring sun. Each swing was a promise, to herself, to the dream she refused to abandon. The mountains whispered solitude, but she'd grown used to that silence. It was her music now. The cabin she was building wasn't just a home, it was her salvation after losing everything. The world had taken too much, her husband, her house, her faith. But out here, among the pines and wind, she was reclaiming it all, one log at a time. She didn't need help, or so she thought. The day he showed up, she heard the soft crunch of boots before she saw him. A tall man, hat pulled low, with eyes like quiet storms. He didn't say much at first, just leaned against a fence post, watching her work. Clara didn't look up, didn't ask who he was. In the mountains, people came and went like seasons. "You lost," she finally called out, not pausing her swing. "No," he said, voice steady but gentle. "Just wondering if you could use a partner." The words hung in the crisp air like smoke. Clara dropped her axe and turned to face him. "I don't need a partner," she said firmly, her breath visible in the cool morning light. "I can handle this myself." The man nodded, unoffended, and tipped his hat slightly. "Didn't say you couldn't," he murmured, "just thought maybe you shouldn't have to." Something in his tone, neither pity nor pride, made her pause. Before she could reply, he was already walking away, boots crunching softly down the trail, leaving her with questions she didn't want to ask. Days passed, and she kept working. The logs were heavier than she remembered, her hands more blistered. The nights colder, lonelier. Sometimes, she thought she heard footsteps beyond the trees, but it was always the wind. Until one morning, she found a neat stack of chopped wood near her cabin, freshly split, still warm from the axe. No note, no sign of who had done it. But she knew. The silent rancher had returned, helping without asking, giving without expecting. It both irritated and comforted her in ways she couldn't explain. Winter had left scars on the land, and on her. Clara's hands were raw, her body weary, but her spirit still burned. The cabin walls were half up now, strong but incomplete, just like her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, she caught sight of him again, leading a horse loaded with supplies. "You're persistent," she said, trying not to smile. He shrugged. "Guess I like good projects." There was warmth in his eyes, quiet and honest. Against her will, she felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt in years: trust. They worked together in silence, a rhythm building between them. He never took over, never ordered her around. When she lifted a beam, he steadied it. When she planned the roof, he listened. There was something healing about it, two broken souls rebuilding not just wood and stone, but something deeper. They shared little about their pasts. She didn't tell him about the accident that took her husband. He didn't tell her why he'd left his ranch empty for years. Maybe they both understood that pain didn't need explaining, it just needed space to breathe. Some nights they sat by the fire, sipping coffee in chipped enamel mugs. The mountains glowed under the moonlight, and the silence between them was peaceful. "You ever get tired of being alone?" she asked one night. He poked the fire with a stick before answering. "I got tired of pretending I wasn't." His honesty hit her harder than she expected. She looked at him, seeing not the stoic rancher who'd wandered into her world, but a man quietly searching for belonging, just like her. The days grew longer, and the cabin neared completion. She'd never thought she'd feel pride like this again. The logs stood strong, the windows framed the valley view, and the scent of pine filled the air. Yet a strange fear began to creep in. What if, when it was done, he left? What if the silence returned for good? One evening, she caught him packing his saddlebag, and her heart dropped. "You leaving?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Job's done." She swallowed hard. "I didn't ask you to come." "I know," he said, "and you didn't ask me to stay either." The next morning, the sound of his horse faded down the trail, leaving her with a cabin that finally stood whole, and a heart that suddenly felt half empty. She threw herself into finishing touches, anything to drown out the ache. But every board she nailed echoed with the same thought: it wasn't the wood or walls that made this place home. It was the quiet company she hadn't known she needed. And now, it was gone. That night, she sat by the fire, staring at the empty chair beside her, tears tracing the dirt on her cheeks. Spring returned, bringing with it new life and a sense of peace she fought to accept. The cabin was finished, sturdy and beautiful. She'd done it, against every odd. But the silence was heavier now. Sometimes she spoke aloud just to fill the air. "You got your cabin, Clara," she told herself one evening, "now what?" The wind rustled through the pines, almost answering. Then, faintly, she heard it, a horse's distant neigh, carried on the mountain air. She froze, heart pounding, afraid to hope. By the time she stepped outside, he was there, dust-covered, tired, and smiling faintly. "You again," she whispered, voice trembling. He nodded. "Couldn't stay away," he said simply. "You built something worth coming back to." She felt tears welling, not just for him, but for everything she'd lost and found again. "I thought you said the job was done," she murmured. He looked at the cabin, then back at her. "It was. But maybe I was building something too. Just took me a while to see it." They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind tugging at their hair, the scent of pine thick in the air. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "So what now?" He smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Now we build the rest of it, together." For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to carry everything alone. She nodded, feeling something bloom in her chest, warm, wild, real. Maybe healing didn't come with hammers and nails. Maybe it came with shared silence and steady hands. Weeks passed, and life settled into a quiet rhythm again. They tended a small garden, repaired fences, and laughed over burnt biscuits. He spoke more now, little stories of his ranch, his past, his regrets. She shared hers in fragments, each word lighter than the last. They didn't need grand declarations, their love grew in small gestures, the way he'd warm her coffee before she woke, the way she'd patch his worn shirt without being asked. Their cabin became more than wood and stone, it became a sanctuary for two hearts that had learned how to trust again. Sometimes, as dusk painted the mountains gold, Clara would watch him chop wood by the creek, his movements steady and sure. She'd smile quietly, realizing she no longer saw herself as broken. The mountains hadn't changed, but she had. She had learned that strength wasn't just in doing everything alone. It was in letting someone in. It was in saying, yes, when life offered another chance. And that chance had come wrapped in silence and patience, in a rancher who asked, simply, need a partner. Years later, the cabin stood firm, weathered but beautiful. Wildflowers grew along the porch, and laughter often spilled out through its windows. Travelers passing by sometimes stopped to admire it, calling it, the cabin of two hearts. Clara never corrected them. She knew they'd built something more than a home, they'd built hope. And every beam, every stone, whispered their story, of loss, of courage, of the power of quiet love that didn't demand but simply stayed. On clear mornings, she'd sit on the porch with him, watching the sun rise over the valley. "You still think you don't need a partner?" He'd tease, sipping his coffee. She'd smile, eyes soft. "No," she'd say, "I think I needed you more than I wanted to admit." He'd reach for her hand, rough against hers, and the silence between them would hum with peace. They didn't need to say the rest. It was written in the way their fingers intertwined, steady, strong, and sure. As years rolled by, storms came and went, but the cabin always stood. They grew older, but their bond only deepened. Even on days when work was hard and the winters cruel, they faced it side by side. Sometimes she'd catch him gazing at her with quiet affection, and she'd laugh, "What are you looking at?" He'd grin and say, "The strongest woman I ever met." And she'd reply softly, "The only reason I could be was because you believed I could." When the time came that he fell ill, Clara cared for him the way he once cared for her, steady, patient, full of grace. One evening, as they watched the sunset for what they both knew might be the last time, he whispered, "Promise me you'll keep building." Tears filled her eyes. What else is there left to build? He smiled weakly. "Tomorrow. Always build tomorrow." She held his hand tightly, the same hand that had lifted logs beside her so many years ago, and nodded. After he was gone, the mountains seemed quieter, but not empty. She still heard his voice in the wind, saw his smile in the dawn. Every day, she added something new, a fence post, a flower bed, a story shared with a traveler passing through. She kept building, just as he'd asked. Because love, she realized, wasn't about holding on, it was about carrying forward. And she would carry him in every nail, every sunrise, every breath. In the end, Clara's cabin became more than a home. It became a living testament to resilience and love reborn from loss. People who visited said they could feel peace there, a warmth that lingered long after they left. They never knew the full story, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that once, a woman built her cabin one log at a time. And a silent rancher came along, asking gently, "Need a partner?" And in that simple question, two broken hearts found their way back to life.